very warm welcome to you all today. Welcome to the second series now of our client experience webinar program. We're delighted to have you all here today. For those of you that are new to this program, this whole series of webinars has been designed actually with the input of some of the clients and contacts on the call today, designed to really address what we know you care about. So the agenda is not a legal one. It's always about strategy or leadership, personal development topics, market trends and issues, or legal operations. So these are the topics you've told us you care about, and that's why we're focusing on these areas. And why today that we are addressing the very timely, much debated, spoken about recession or downturn. The economists, it seems at the moment, can't quite agree whether we will be in a global recession in 2023, whether we're in a recession right now in some of our markets, but for sure, whether it ends up being classified a global recession or not, many organizations and many sectors are going to be facing challenging times. And we recognize the difficulties that brings for many of you in your roles, and therefore wanted to leverage the insight that we have within Denton's from former general counsel, people that have sat in seats very similar to yours, to share their views and practical insights on how you go about planning for a downturn or a recession response, and some of the key issues that you will need to look at. So I'm delighted that we're being joined by Victoria and Greg today, as you can see from Kraft Heinz and Lloyds Bank respectively. Before they share their view, I just also wanted to advertise that we have distilled some of their insights into, if you like, a top tips document, a guide on all the areas that you can see on the right of the screen right now. So if you would like to access this guide, please just email the CX program team. We'll be advertising our email address throughout today's session. Just get in touch with us and we will send you the deck. We've done it as a deck so that we've included, as you can see on the screen, different charts that you might want to use, different prioritization tools or structures you could adopt as you try to navigate your data and tell your story within your organization at this time. So hopefully you will find that incredibly useful. So if you'd like a copy, as I said, please just send us an email and we will send that to you. Before I hand over to Victoria to get things going, we thought we would start to encourage your engagement, and really what we try to do with these webinars is create a safe space for you to share your opinions, network with each other, ask questions of our speakers. But it'd be great if you could spend a moment now letting us all know what your priorities are quite right now. So the question we're posing is, what are your operational priorities in the context of a recession or business downturn? And you can select as many of these as you like. So we're starting with cost cutting. Then there's defending your budget. How are you going to make sure that your budget doesn't get cut? How are you going to demonstrate your team's value to business stakeholders at this time? Obviously critical to defending your budget. What is the role that digitization or automation might have? Is that something that you're going to be prioritizing and thinking about? How are you then looking ahead, 2023, beyond 2023? Is risk mapping your current priority and area of concern or focus? And then if we go down, there's also self-service options there. Is that what you're trying to think about doing? Empowering perhaps your business stakeholders to make sure they're able to do more themselves? Is it around team management and retention? Are you trying to really focus on how you maintain a good team morale at this time? Are people beginning to be anxious and concerned? How do you handle all of that? And finally, as with every good survey, there's the option of other. And if you do, so far, no one has selected other, but if you do feel tempted to have a press on the other button, then it would be great if you could put what you are thinking into the chat today, because that will then really help us understand what we've missed off from this list. So far, nearly half of you have participated. Let's get pressing on those buttons to get a few more of you voting, please. Keep going, keep going. I'm going to go for another. I'm going to count down from 10. So if you haven't clicked yet, please do. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thanks everybody. Neve, if you can end the poll and share, that would be great. Great. So the number one issue is demonstrating your team's value to business stakeholders. Followed closely, it looks to me like risk mapping and defending your budget. So and then of course the importance of team management and retention is also clear from these scores. So thank you very much for voting, and I'm sure Victoria and Greg will very much pick up on these themes as we go through the discussion now. So thank you, and Victoria, please, over to you.
Thanks very much, Judith, and thank you everyone for joining us in your busy day and making time for this session, which I hope will be very useful. Greg and I had put our heads together and had a discussion around topics we would have wanted a bit of help and guidance around as General Counsel. And the idea is this session should be interactive. So if you've got questions, you disagree with what we're saying, you've got an alternative point of view, please do put that in the chat. Or put your hand up, take yourself off mute, come onto the camera and ask us a question live. Always quite risky, but you can always ask a question. It's up to us whether we answer it or not. So thank you for participating in the poll. I think we are going to cover all those topics today. The first one I wanted to lead out with was horizon scanning, because of course, as I'm sure those of you who are keeping abreast of the news will know, the Bank of England a little earlier today has said we are possibly already in recession in the UK. And then, of course, there's a flurry of other experts saying we are or we aren't. So without further ado, how do you keep abreast of topical events, and how do you do your horizon scanning as a General Counsel, Greg?
Thanks, Victoria. Hello, everyone. Well, it's interesting. Of course, I've now joined the dark side in private practice and looking at financial regulation. And actually, one of the inspirations for that was I realised how important understanding the regulatory environment we sat in as a bank was to my role as General Counsel. And actually, it surprised me how, when I chatted with others, how maybe that wasn't such a priority, and it was much more focused on the BAU. But I think, I don't think anyone since the credit crunch of 2008 or COVID has ever really sort of settled into BAU. So just having an eye on the horizon, or even what's over the horizon, is just critical to the role. But there's no sort of easy way of doing it. You just have to have your sources, and that's both from your network. I mean, I found some of the best insights over a beer talking to the GC of a fellow bank sometimes, but equally there'll be the sifting through the various materials that come through from the law firms or the consultants, and often what you're looking for there is just a nugget that really what the law firms can do is give a really good sort of in-depth analysis of what the problem statement is. But what you as General Counsel can do much better than us folks in private practice is apply that to the environment that you're in and the products that your business works with. So really your job is to do sort of a really applied analysis and sift through and figure out which are the ones that really are going to impact your business, and then stress test it. Go and talk to people within your business and say, to your chief risk officer, is this what's keeping you up at night? And get a sense, and almost then, as you sort of develop those sort of that dialogue, you start to notice which are the things that keep on coming up, and then that forms your top 5. So, I think having a sort of almost, I used to keep a pad where I had my sort of top 20 risks, and I just play the game of just which ones are sort of getting more interesting or more worrying for the business. So I think definitely looking around and talk to your team. So the other thing that I learned, and it's one of the things you learn to become General Counsel, you normally are a specialist lawyer, and then you start to manage a team, and then you start to manage budgets, and then when you're General Counsel, you're advising the board the CEO. And so you don't quite have the same amount of time to really get into the detail that maybe some of your junior team can do. So talk to them, get them to sort of flag what they're hearing about, and what you as GC should be raising at the next risk committee.
Thanks, Greg. Coming from an FMCG background, your discussion of getting together with the GC of a competitor bank over a beer filled me with horror, because in FMCG world, we'd be thinking, gosh, is this an anti-competitive practice? But nonetheless, we could talk to our peers. I am not a member now, but people in my team have been members, and I have participated in the Association of Corporate Counsel previously. We're not affiliated with them, but they are a very useful industry group where you can safely get together with your competitors, regardless of your industry, and discuss topical issues. The ACC at certain points in time will also potentially do a bit of lobbying of government or different organisations around proposed legislation. So whilst we're in no way affiliated with them, if you're not already a member or not aware of them, I'd encourage you to go away and have a look. And then I would say generally as a general counsel, particularly here at Dentons, and given we cover a wide geographic region, one of the things that I find invaluable, and Greg, you touched on this, is talking to colleagues across the business. And I've always done that, whatever my role has been, because you will find from the bottom up, you will hear the biggest and the best and the most important risks, which should be part of your risk management and mapping program anyway. So if it's not, I encourage you to adopt the rituals and routines of meeting regularly with colleagues across the business to hear about what's going on in their area and what they perceive the risks to be, because they will know far more, as Greg says, than you will know about what those risks are and what the risks are perceived as being within the business as well in their areas, because of course they're subject matter experts if they're within the finance team, the tax team, and more broadly across the business in sales and marketing, et cetera. So we've talked about horizon scanning. We've got an idea of what may or may not be affecting our business, and we've used our network, we've used our law firms, and we've used our sort of associations where we can. How do we go about planning what we're going to do as we look into a recession, Greg?
Well, that is that's the key question. It ties in a little bit to the poll that we just did around demonstrating your team's value, because I think horizon scanning is that bedrock to understand what it is that is about to happen. Like Judith says, we're not quite sure how this next recession is going to impact the businesses that we support. But we know our businesses well enough. We probably know, we know the geographies, we know the customers, we know the environment. So it's likely we might know what sorts of things will start to become really important to the business and will require, dedicated, timely support and advice. And those areas that maybe will start to sort of have less of a need for support. And so I think it's quite a useful exercise anyway to just sort of map what your team does, what you spend your time on. I mean, actually, I stopped doing that a long time ago because it never seems the right mix. But just having some analysis of what it is that keeps the department busy and what you're valued for, and where you think you provide the most value. They just start thinking, well, do you have the right people? Do you have the right tools? Are you surrounded by the right advisors externally? Do you have the right phone numbers of the people to phone in a real crisis? I mean, just think, if it's COVID-22 on Sunday, what is it you're going to do in those first 48 hours, and how can you provide the most value? So I think there's an element of just setting yourself up for a different type of workload than you're probably currently doing at the moment, and anticipate what that might be. I won't prejudge what everyone else's workload would look like, but just anticipate what sort of velocity of questions, what sort of advice is likely to be required, what at what time of the night, just be prepared. And then you might need to start making some tough decisions about whether you do have the right shape of team, whether there's you're going to be asked questions about your costs, about where you perceive the risks of the business, and just anticipate all those sorts of things. And it just starts with a blank piece of paper and just build from there. Because when you can look back at the last recession, but invariably they seem to be different every time, and therefore whether that's relevant or not. But there are definitely some lessons, certainly I've learned from what happened in 2020 and certainly what happened in 2007, 2008. I even go back to what happened in 2012 when it was Grexit rather than Brexit. So there's probably lessons you can all learn from your experiences, and so ultimately, just being ready, I think, is the important thing, and understanding where you can provide the value to the business that you support.
Thanks, Greg. I think there's one thing that we can all be clear on as you face into a recession or an economic downturn. It's that we need to expect the unexpected. And this is where hopefully we've got some business continuity and planning in place. And if not, we might want to be thinking about it so that we're ready. And that always seems to end up with the legal team, in my experience. So if you haven't got a business continuity plan and a crisis management plan in place, I would encourage everybody to think about it. We would use it at Kraft Heinz for even things like issues with product quality. It just helps give people some structure and some discipline around making sure all the right decision makers are involved and informed at various stages of what might turn out to be a crisis or might turn out to be a storm in a teacup. And I think, speaking from my personal experience, it is super important to understand where your business criticalities lie. So in FMCG, it would be our key ingredient suppliers, some of our key packaging suppliers, and it might be that some of them are very small suppliers of what are very critical ingredients. So if they are struggling in a recession, or how would we find out? Do we understand, and how have our procurement colleagues mapped that? So one of the easy ways the in-house legal team can demonstrate value is to partner up with the procurement team, for example, and look at some of those business critical issues and how you might need to get ahead of them to make sure you can keep ketchup on the shelf. Because wouldn't it be a disaster for the nation if there were no Kraft Heinz ketchup on the shelf? So thinking through things laterally, I've always found to be very helpful, and talking to colleagues across the business to understand what they're worried about as well, then informs how you can get ahead of the curve with an in-house legal team. I don't know if that resonates with you, Greg.
Yeah, no, definitely. Funny enough, as you were talking, I was just wondering how our respective industries treat their legal teams, and sometimes in stress, we'd often just be asked to do stuff that was well outside of our remit. We often get confused with the compliance team, the procurement team, the business team even, and I'm just curious to know how you cope with that, because I think one of the things that we probably have all learned from recessions is that there's more work to be done, and it is a collective effort, and sometimes you just have to pitch in, but it is a long game, and sometimes you have to sort of stick to your knitting and sort of push back on some of the requests to do stuff that needs to get done. I just wonder, is that just banking, or is it across the spectrum?
Well, I'll speak for FMCG. That's certainly what one of my US colleagues used to call, lawyers like to be helpful, and we're very good at throwing our bodies over the bombs. So effectively, we can come in and sort out what might be a very complex issue. And because we're problem solvers, we love to do that. So you're absolutely right. We have to know critically when to do that and when not to do that. And as general counsel, it's for us to help our team understand that as well, so that our resource is not just inundated doing what is effectively other people's jobs sometimes.
Yeah, no, lawyers are too helpful. And you're right. I think most of us came to this industry because we're good at problem solving. So, and this is the thing. I think recessions. I shouldn't smile at the idea of recession, but I think this is where we come into our own. We really can demonstrate our value much better in a crisis, I think, than steady waters. So, I think with a bit of preparation and a bit of understanding of what you can do, you can really make a difference and remind the business of why it is that they have such an expensive team of people.
Thanks, Greg. I agree. And part of demonstrating your value to the business is actually owning your data. And we're very lucky to have Ash with us today, who is not a lawyer, you'll be pleased to hear, who can talk to us a little bit about what he does as his day job, which is helping clients own their data so that they can better service their businesses and demonstrate their value. He runs a Helix operation for us, and you'll be wondering what Helix is. So I'm now going to turn it over to Ash because he will be able to tell you all about it.
Thank you very much, Victoria. So I'm Ash. I'm the managing director of Denton's Helix, which is a practice within Denton's where we work with our clients to understand their goals and challenges, and then work with them to actually achieve these goals and mitigate the challenges, and help them run and operate post go live. And this could be around resourcing, technology, automation, data developments, and anything that achieves the goals that we're set out to achieve. Generally speaking, this always starts with data. So I'm just rewinding this session back to Greg, when you said you recorded what you were doing, but you gave that up because it wasn't looking like the right mix. Well, that's the wrong answer, okay? Because actually, that's when you should really focus in on what you're doing and see why you're doing it. So we always start with our clients to look at what they're doing in-house. And what the team are working on. Okay, so have you got the right level of resource internally working on the right work? Generally speaking, what we see quite a lot is no. Rather than the in-house team working on the interesting, more strategic work, they're firefighting in the less strategic, more kind of BAU activity in the what would be in the bottom left-hand quadrant of a matrix, which is on the toolkit that you can subscribe to through the chat. And we work with them to understand where they want to be, where they're spending their current time, and what other opportunities there are for that group, whether it's to look at technology, look at automation. One of the things we often see is a huge amount of work hitting legal, which should never hit legal, right? It's just taking the time up the legal department, taking up those hours, often leading to overflow to third-party law firms, when actually you should just be automating and self-serving these tools. And so it would help kind of identify where that can be a benefit and a time saving and a cost saving going forward. And then, off the back of this, you need to look at your external spend, so the data from your law firms and your LPOs and alternative legal providers. And they'll have all this information. So if you haven't been getting them to send it to you in the right format, we can probably help as well to suggest a format for them to be providing and to really understand where you're spending money. Are you spending it on the right level of resource within those third parties, how you could potentially consolidate that spend and therefore have a better buying power with your third parties, and then to think a little bit around alternative pricing. Unless you've got the data in front of you, unless you've got the numbers that you can then take to your law firms, you can't really drive an alternative pricing agreement because there's too many variables and too much risk for the third party. So again, having the right data in front of you, understanding the complexity of the work, the types of resource you need to do that work, and how much of that work you have, you can definitely then take that, package it, and demand a better solution from your law firms. And then once you've kind of got through what we'd call the sort of the starting blocks of what the ultimate target operating model might look like, then you can start thinking about continuous improvements and analyzing more data and more information as it comes through, which is how do we become more efficient? Where are our playbooks and precedents not quite right? Where can we tweak how we're currently doing, contract negotiations, or how can we open our stores quicker by getting our lease agreements done faster. And those again are different data points that you can be taking back to your CFOs, to your general counsels, to your CEOs, and actually show the value of legal by identifying where these different pain points are, and then giving solutions again as to what you would suggest as being the way to kind of mitigate these going forward. So those are kind of a few of the areas from a data perspective that we've seen recently with a number of our clients. But it's a fascinating field, and as I said before, if you haven't got a huge amount of data currently, push your third parties who can provide you definitely with a good stack of information to begin with, and then kind of start the number crunching and analysis from there on in.
Thanks, Ash. And I absolutely loved when you were telling me about one particular client and one of their playbooks for negotiating a particular type of contract. And we were able to help them analyse how often they actually managed to get that clause agreed and how much time was spent negotiating that particular clause by either their internal lawyers or their external lawyers. And we're actually able to say to the client, are you taking the right position here, when 9 times out of 10 you're compromising anyway? So there's a risk reward benefit to the data analysis that really, I think, would impress your CFO if you were able to share that level of data analysis. And Greg, I don't know about you, but I think in addition to Ash and the great work that can be done with external legal providers, I was always under pressure around headcount and budgets and how we were working internally as well. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit around how you would make sure your data was accurate and up to date, because in my experience, I'm not sure HR always gave me the best or most accurate data. I might sometimes have to do a bit of sense checking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating, it's probably a webinar of its own, understanding what your department does. But I think sometimes it's too easy to say, well, we don't really have the sources of data to prove where we are. I mean, your own team will know what they do. If all you did was ask them to just do, you know, a really rough, ready view of what they spent their time on, you'd be 80% there within, you know, a couple of days. And then actually it's just about finessing it. And I think you know, with data insights, it provides, it almost provides the sort of direction of travel instantly. You see where you spend your value, like Ash's example. And I remember setting a target for one of my negotiating teams, and they said of something like negotiating, I forget, negotiating is the master agreement. I think it was, I think I said 8 or 10 a month, and they said, where have you got that number from? And I said, well, that's from my data. And they were, oh, that's interesting. And then eventually people started to engage with it. So, okay, from there, well, what do I do as an individual? And humans are competitive, and so some people are doing 14 and going, well, what am I doing better than my colleagues? And the people who are 6 were going, well, maybe I'm going to get made redundant. So actually, data really drives behaviours, and I think, you know, it's being alive to that and trying to figure out what it is that you can do. But I think ultimately, you know, what are the people in your department doing, you know, and is it the sort of thing that they joined your department to do or became a lawyer to do? And I think often you find the complaint of people is that you sort of, I'm doing too much admin, or I'm doing too much sort of BAU or sort of documentation tasks or whatever. And so actually, by pointing out where you could make efficiencies, you start to find some gaps for people to focus on some of the more strategic stuff. So the horizon scanning, the advising the business on their risks and helping them manage those risks and anticipate them. Learn lessons from litigation back into templates. These are the things that are interesting, not, you know, negotiating 10 contracts or 13 contracts a month. So actually, I think it's empowering your team to find, you know, heighten what they're doing, and it's a continuous improvement. But I think in this, whilst we're talking about, you know, sort of preparing yourself for a recession, I think there's some tricks that you can use to understand how you can help the business with their priorities. So I'm sure whenever anyone looks at their department, there are maybe more efficient ways of doing things, or there could be focus on other activities, or you could hand off some of the things that you like to do to other departments. And so I think as you're sort of heading towards a recession, you should be starting thinking about, from a prioritization point of view, what is it that you could stop doing, or you could hand off to other people, or you could sort of scale back in order to expand your capacity to deal with the things that are really important to the business, in a recession or in more sort of crisis times. So I think data insights are really important, and to the extent you haven't got any points, don't worry, you might know more about it than you think, but just map it out and start thinking about choices ultimately.
Thanks, Greg. I agree, and that segues into owning your narrative as a GC or in a legal function. Because, are you the department of NO, or are you the department of knowledge? And some of those data points can really help in that discussion, in my experience. And also that segues into demonstrating your team and your department's value to the wider business. So, Greg, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you went about doing that, and how successful you were, and maybe if you weren't successful, what would you do differently?
Goodness, that's almost like I should be on a psychologist chair to respond to that. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think so. I think knowing what your team is capable of is the most important thing. What would you like them to do if they had the time? Are they sitting at the right table? I remember a long while back, our general counsel had the target of getting legal at the ExCom or at the board, and I think that's that's quite interesting. Are you at the risk committee? Do you support a business remotely, or do you have really good connections? Are there opportunities for you to give? So we've talked about horizon scanning, so we have a really good idea of what the risks are for the business. Do we have the opportunity to then go and tell the business about what it is that we're worried about, how we can help? And so I think it is a bit of a challenge, because I think often when you're sort of facing into some challenging times, to your point of whether you're the no department or the no department is quite, you certainly don't want to be known as a no department. You need to be an ideas department. You need to be the creative department that can problem solve through the issues. And so often it's about being in the right place at the right time, and giving people the opportunity, and empowering people as well. So I think that's about structure and making sure people who have the right skills are sort of not being buried in admin. They're ready to respond to a crisis. And I think the other thing is sort of just understanding the culture of your organization, and the personality types as well. It might be as simple as matching the right people with the right people, to a certain extent, to get the right conversations going. So I think there's all of that, and I think it's just I think there is there's no sort of, sometimes it's a bit down to luck. I think you have to expect that you might just get asked the right question at the right time, and that demonstrates your value. And or you may not get that opportunity, and you just sort of see the opportunity pass by. But I think it is about preparing for what it is that you think the business are going to need support on, and then just being ready and prepared.
Thanks, Greg. I always found that one of the things I like to do was think about my team's KPIs and objectives and align those with some of the business KPIs and objectives. So as I was telling a story about the legal team, I could say we are here to both promote and protect the business. And I like sporting analogies. I don't like football, but I'll use the sporting analogy I always used to use, which is we're both a goal scorer and a goalkeeper. And that needs to be woven into the narrative that you're telling the business. And I also used to head up corporate affairs, which is something a lot of American companies do. You have your GC looking after effectively external affairs, so communications. And I think legal departments probably don't think often enough about how they're showing up across the business, what their brand is, and how they market themselves. And actually, every interaction with a business colleague, and I talk about business colleagues, not clients across the company. In fact, it fills me with dread when I hear in-house lawyers refer to their colleagues as clients, because actually in business, we're all in it together. At least that's my view. It is every interaction and every moment taken at a time that builds out your own personal brand as a lawyer. And I know we've worked with clients previously. Joanne Wakeford, our Global Chief Client Officer, has worked with several clients on how lawyers can build out their own personal brand and how that then builds up into the communications and corporate branding of the in-house legal department. Because sometimes it can be as simple as owning a narrative and telling the story of how great we are. We all know we do great work, but it's actually having the data and then articulating that.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah,
I was going to say the brand of the department is really important, and I'm thoughtful of a time when there were I was part of a wider legal department, and there were sort of silos within that department, and the brand of each of the silos was inconsistent, and the business hated that. They didn't quite know what the legal department was, and it was all about personalities and brands that certain people had to had created, and actually the first thing that needed to be done at that point was to agree on what the brand was for the in-house legal team, and for those people who weren't on message, to consider whether they were in the right in-house department. Because I think in-house legal departments are about trust, and you can't be confusing about what it is that you do, and actually we talk a little bit about personalities, but actually dialing back personalities, it's the team that will get us through this whole thing. And so harnessing that collaborating with the team is so important, particularly in a recession. And so one of the things that you might want to think about as you're heading into a recession is, are there members of the team that are taking up more time than they should of your sort of management time, and is it what you want to be spending your time on? So those are the sorts of things that I think those are quite difficult conversations, but I think it's about preparing yourself for being absolutely laser focused on, as you say, supporting the business colleagues with their priorities.
Thanks, Greg. I agree, and you touched on the topic there, which I think was one of the top ranked in the poll at the beginning, which is around team retention and management. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you would go about retaining your team and managing them in a recession, where people might be concerned about their futures, concerned about their jobs, and depending on your industry and company, they might be rightly concerned about those things. How have you managed your teams in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, banking is known for in recessions being quite brutal in reducing headcount, and I think you probably over the years I've probably made as many people redundant as I've hired. So it's a bit of a cycle, and so therefore you have to be honest with people to say, ultimately that's the environment we're in. I suppose where certain individuals are doing activity, is likely to be, when you look at what the business priorities are, may well be at risk of being no longer being needed. Then it's about having those honest conversations about whether that individual wants to carry on doing that elsewhere, or whether they want to sort of add a few more strings to their bow. I mean, I do think the one thing I've probably learned from previous recessions is that specialists, whilst very useful, do have a limited shelf life, and actually helping people broaden their skill set so that they are more capable of doing a broader remit, I think is actually really good for the individual. I think it's really good for the business as well. So actually, one of the things that you can do is to help people with their own self learning and training needs, and you can do that. You should be doing that anyway. With people, always have one eye with what the future challenges are. I mean, if you're a lending lawyer negotiating loan agreements in good times, you will become a restructuring lawyer in the bad times. I mean, why not? And if that really interests you, why wouldn't you look more into the sort of harder advice on insolvencies? And so I think there's opportunities there for people, but I think you just have to be honest that there may well be cuts, and and as long as you sort of deal with that process in a transparent way and follow the group processes, I think most people sort of are happy with, accept that's where the institution you're working for is at the moment, and tough decisions have to be made.
And Greg, have you ever been asked to make decisions by senior management that you have strongly disagreed with, for example, and where you fought a corner and possibly won or not won, as the case may be, around the size and shape and structure of your team?
Interestingly, I think I've always been asked to hit a number, as opposed to anyone saying, why have you got all those lending lawyers? So I think it's often been quite a personal sort of decision as to how you sort of help get to that number. Often what slightly has irked me is that sometimes the number isn't the number, and so it's a bit of a process. And probably the learning I've had is to maybe depersonalize it a little bit, because you can worry too much about Ryan's mortgage or Jane's MBA that she's doing, and you kind of have to just think about ruthlessly about what is the best mix, and just be like every other business area, you're just being asked to help with the strategic priority that the business has set, and that currently is to reduce costs. So I think there have been times where I felt the knife has been a bit close to the bone, but then I think you just then push that back to say ultimately that will cause a risk, and if that's what is required, then we may have to pay for that further down the line by increased litigation or whatever. So but these things are often a sort of a dialogue, aren't they?
I think that's right. I think I had the situation once where a new incoming CEO gave me a number, but he didn't give me a budget number. He gave me a number of people I could employ in my team, and I was fairly adamant that was going to expose the business to all sorts of risks. So working with our global general counsel, I put together a slide deck that listed out lawyer by lawyer what each person did and the risks that the business would be accepting. And at the time, it was a very small legal team, so it was useful for the incoming CEO to get to know the legal team, and the slide presentation I did, who did what and what risks he would be accepting, depending on which two lawyers were asked to leave the team. So actually, at the end of the day, we didn't lose any lawyers out of the team. So there is that piece there around owning your narrative, demonstrating the value, and defending your team as well from budget cuts where you believe that to be justified, and of course in an appropriate way. That was in a very direct environment in FMCG, fast moving, fast paced, and with a direct CEO. It might not work so well in some other industries or with other CEOs. So again, that goes back to knowing your audience as well. But you know, I think part of our role, Greg, and sometimes it's tricky as a general counsel, is to manage risk for the company and to ensure that the board is appropriately informed around any potential risks that, you know, we think are a step too far. And that's the tightrope that we walk every day as a general counsel. I don't know if you've ever had any similar experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you're right. I think it's really about making sure the business understand the value of the department and the choices that are being made and the consequences. And I think you're right. I think I definitely remember a time in 2008 where we actually had merged, Lloyd's and HBOS merged. And so we had two departments, and everywhere around the two departments that merged, legal departments, and everywhere around the organization were just sort of cutting 25, 30, 40% of headcount because, well, we merged, we've got twice as many people as we needed. I was a bit cheeky and asked for an extra 5, but it was because, you know, the risks that were being, you know, the two banks beforehand probably weren't well set for the risks that they were facing, which probably led to a lot of the consequences. And I was articulating, actually, if we're going to sort of prevent them from happening again, we need more people, or we need more people with the right skills. So, you know, I think it's tricky. What I definitely didn't enjoy is when you know, certain people in decision-making positions were making assumptions about the team based on whether they liked someone or not. And you know, I think that's always a bit tricky, because sometimes, you know, we used to have this description of people who are sort of, you know, very friendly with the business and, you know, facilitated business, but maybe weren't quite keeping a close eye on the risks that were being generated by that book. So often, sometimes the decisions that you were making weren't quite aligned with how you know, they were surprised at the choices you were making. So yeah, I think you have to trust your own gut on that sort of thing.
I agree, Greg. And you know, so we've managed to retain the team, and we've managed to be honest and open with the team. I think you had a great phrase earlier when we were discussing this, where you were talking about how you manage a team in a recession, by being honest with them, but not making promises that you can't deliver. And I think that's so important in an environment where people are uncertain. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, but I thought that was a brilliant observation that you made when we were talking earlier.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think leading any team is all about trust and mutual respect. So, you know, I think yeah, ultimately you just need to sort of make sure everybody's in the same place of understanding of where things are. I think sometimes I've always been a bit surprised by how maybe some people put their head in the sand and just sort of divorce their own, you know, I'm busy, so therefore I'm relevant, I'm valued, and of course those are true, but you know, are you sort of prepared for the next cycle? So yeah, I think yeah, but yeah, as I say, it's another topic, performance management of in-house legal teams. But I do think I do think it's important to, there'll be and that's the other thing, is that as a GC you'll be privy to certain knowledge that maybe you can't share with your department, and so therefore you have to be careful around that as well, and sometimes that does create a personal conflict within yourself that you do want to share with others, but ultimately that you can't, because it's either highly confidential or inappropriate. So sometimes it's a bit lonely being a GC, isn't it?
It is, Greg, and that's why forums like this I always used to find invaluable. And then I used to try and find innovative things to do with the team that would be fun, and keep them engaged, because I think in a recession, people think, I can't host a team event, I can't have an away day, I can't do this, I can't do that. I think there is something about being creative, and things don't need to cost very much money to be fun. So I would encourage people to focus on that sort of more pastoral side of team management as well, because a little goes a long way. And I think Judith is putting up the second poll now. So Judith, over to you.
Thanks, Victoria. I thought it would be good, just as we're going into the final few minutes of this webinar, if we could do one more poll with everybody, and also therefore give everybody a chance to think about these questions, but also if you want to come off mute, or if you want to put in the chat any questions or observations for Victoria or Greg, please feel free to do that before we go into closing remarks. So the question for you now is, if you're preparing for a recession, what legal risks associated with a downturn are you planning for now? So we hope that this kind of data will help you see how your peers are currently approaching what's coming next. What are they looking at? Are you typical of your peers? So the options are contract management, competition and antitrust, insolvency risk, redundancy programs, regulatory changes, and supplier management, or something else. And as with before, if there's something else on your horizon that you're seeing as a big risk or an issue that you need to really get to grips with, please do put it in the chat. So let's get you voting. I'll give you obviously a few more moments. So think about, currently supplier management looks to be trending highest. It's just cutting ahead of contract management. So let's see how we keep going. If a few more of you can vote, that would be great. Press your buttons now so we get your scores on the doors. There we go, a few more coming in. Supplier management is still edging out there. But we're starting to see, okay, so we didn't have anyone selecting competition or antitrust before, but someone now has clicked that button. So we're seeing every category light up now except for other. So if anyone else wants to vote, we're going to take it down in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, if you can share the outcomes so everybody can see. So as you can see, everybody, supplier management was the top response in terms of the risks that are being managed at the moment, which I will let Greg and Victoria comment on momentarily, or probably Victoria most of all, given her background and the contract management point. And then we're going into regulatory changes, what kind of caps might be placed on people, what changes might we now have to deal with, insolvency risk, and then redundancy programs. So thanks everybody. If anyone does have any questions, as I said, put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll ask Victoria and Greg to give us some closing remarks.
Thanks, Judith. On supplier management, I would say you need to stay very close to your business if you're not already having regular catch-ups with the people where you've identified supplier risk. And if you've not actually identified supplier risk, that's going to be the first step. And then the second is to look at how you might mitigate some of those risks through, for example, extending payment terms. How long are you taking to pay your suppliers? Maybe you need to shorten some of those periods to reduce some of the risks, and more generally identify other support measures that you might need to put in place for critical suppliers. And that's certainly something we would be doing in FMCG right now. Greg, over to you.
Yeah, no, it's a really important point. We haven't really talked about how much value you can provide by getting terms negotiated that can support the business, protect the business in downturn times. So yeah, I think that I'm not surprised that's the number one on the list, and I think contract reviews and building in protections in your templates is probably a really good thing to be doing anyway, but just doubling down on, and it goes to all the things we talked about. It helps to sort of protect the business, but you can also then use that as a way to demonstrate your value to the business. So yeah, I think there's a real opportunity there.
Thank you. And I take this opportunity to say thank you to you both for your time, not only live in the webinar, but your thoughts today in the preparation sessions that we've had, because they have been exceedingly helpful. If any of you are listening to this thinking, I need more help, or I need to look at the data that Ash was talking about, and I really need to start gathering some of that, then please do reach out to Joanne Wakeford. Her email address is here, and she can definitely follow up with you, or Ash can, on the content that we've talked about today. The other opportunity for you to access useful information is emailing cxprogram@dentons.com for the recession toolkit that both Victoria and Greg's insight appears within. It covers a whole range of the topics that were covered today and has editable PowerPoint slides that you can use to help demonstrate how you're adding value to the business and start, as you've spoken about today, really being able to talk about the value that you're able to deliver and your priorities in alignment with corporate goals. This is not the only webinar. You'll be pleased to know there's more coming up. So we'd love to hear back from you. Let us know what you thought of today's session. Email us, write in the chat, however you like to get in contact. Just let us know what you think. Coming up next week, we've got strategic planning for your legal function. Then into October, crisis as a catalyst for cultural change. And we're not just talking recession there, we're talking general crisis. Then we've got our WOW series, which is all about having conversations with senior women from in-house legal and learning from their experiences. So Dara is featuring in that particular section. And then on the 20th of October, we've got cross-functional collaboration for ESG success. So hopefully we'll see you again at least one of those sessions, if not all. And as we said, please do get in touch and let us know what you think. This program is designed totally with you at the heart of it. Thanks again to our speakers, Victoria and Greg, and see you all next time. Thank you.